A Marriage Made in Heaven, Project Portfolio Management, and Agile. My name is Paul Peisner. I've been involved with the IT industry for about 2 decades. I've been involved with the IT user communities, partner ecosystems, and innovation networks for about 6 years, and specifically with Vivid and the HP software user groups for about 2 years now. I'm currently involved as a leader in the Northern California chapters. I plan to be a part of special interest groups around the DevOps moving forward. Next slide. This webinar series is brought to you by the Vivid Special Interest Groups from Agile and from Project Portfolio Management. From the Agile group, the leader is David Parker, and from the Project Portfolio Management group is Derek Hornby, Ben Perkins, and Russ King. Next slide. If you're not part of Vivid's special interest groups, we'd encourage you to join them. You can simply log into the Vivid website as a member, go to the special interest group sections, and simply click the button Join Now. Joining a special interest group will keep you informed of relevant information, news that is specific to those interest groups, as well as connect you with network folks of the best and the brightest specific to those conversations. Next slide. Our presenters today from Vivid's Agile Special Interest Group are David Parker and Caleb Brown. From Vivid's Project Portfolio Management Special Interest Group, it'll be Russ King. A little bit of housekeeping on the next slide. Today's session is being recorded for all Vivid members. If you do miss this session, it will be recorded and available to all Vivid members on the website. And if you have any questions during the webinar itself, please type them and send the questions using the question panes in the webinar control panel. Next slide. The webinar control panel typically appears in your right-hand corner. Here's a picture of the GoToWebinar control panel. It appears in the corner of your screen. We'd ask that you would submit a question. Make sure the question pane is expanded. Type your question in and click Send. Okay, with that covered, I'd like to hand this off to Russ to get us started.
Good. Actually, why don't you hand it off to me?
Yeah, David.
This is David Parker. Good morning, everybody. As Paul mentioned, I'm a Vivid SIG leader for the Agile SIG, but I'm also in my day job a member of CollabNet, where I manage our Agile business line. And for those of you not familiar with CollabNet, we are market leaders. We've been around now for about 12 years, focused on applications engineering and application development tools, and focused in more specifically on application lifecycle management tools. We're also known as thought leaders in the Agile space. As evidence of that, we have more certified Scrum trainers on staff than any other vendor out there, and we've actually trained. It's approaching 15,000 certified Scrum Masters and certified Scrum product owners. We've done a lot in the area of helping large enterprises transform toward Agile. And the idea is that this transformation is not just at a team level or at an individual project level, but transformation at scale means rolling out these practices and techniques throughout an enterprise. And as you transform, of course, you end up, you reap larger benefits at scale that Agile can bring. So we've been doing that for many years as well. Many people know CollabNet as a leader in the open source field. Many people know us as the founder of Subversion. And from that base, from Subversion, we've leveraged that experience and expertise toward our SCM and ALM and continuous delivery, and of course Agile offerings. We have a huge customer base, around 5 million customers, 5 million users of CollabNet technologies, and in fact, we host more customers in the cloud than any other vendor out there. About 4,000 customers use CollabNet's cloud offerings to do their application development. That is, using cloud-based offerings as a platform for their application development projects. So that gives you a quick overview of who CollabNet is. Russ, I think you want to tell us a little bit about Results Positive.
Certainly. Thank you, David. This is Russ King from Results Positive, Vice President of Product Development. Been with Results Positive just about 9 months now. Results Positive, are an HP Elite business partner focusing on the strategy, planning, and governance product suite within HP software as an implementation partner. We were in 2010 and 2011 the PPM Implementation Partner of the Year. We have several experienced practitioners with Big Four and HP software consulting experience, so lots of long-time experience, both customers, previous customers of PPM, as well as several folks from the HP group that have joined. Proven customer results. We have over 100 customers at this point where we've done implementations of the strategy, planning, and governance solutions of HP, and primarily focused on PPM. And we also are focusing on the Agile space. So I'm a PPM SIG leader, but over the years, when I was with HP and then recently at Results Positive, the Agile space is becoming more and more of a focus for us, and clearly trying to bridge the gap between what happens in your strategic planning and your strategic project management and then the Agile development teams, and that's what the webinar today is about. So that's a quick overview of Results Positive. Next, I'm going to focus a bit on HP project and portfolio management. Really, when organizations implement HP PPM, it's about the strategic portfolio and project management to be able to understand the projects you're selecting and how they meet the business needs and support the business, and about allocating resources to those and aligning the resources to the appropriate business objectives, balancing the risk across projects, and just purely understanding that project and portfolio space. And as we look at it from an Agile perspective, even when you do Agile development, you still need to have a high-level representation and understanding of the resources that are executing the work. Those are your most strategic resources in an IT organization, and as you execute a project in an Agile development or Scrum team is executing, there is still some desire to understand at least that those resources are working on a certain set of work from the perspective of tying the cost of the work back to the business objectives at a strategic level. And so at a high level, that's an overview of PPM and where it fits into the discussion around PPM and Agile. So David, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, so we thought we'd run a quick poll of the audience and get a sense for what kind of PPM tools you're using out there. I know you're not all going to, hopefully you all have HP's PPM solutions, but we'd like to get a sense for what you are using out there. So if you could participate, that would be great. We'll give it about 30 seconds here. Do you use a PPM tool, and if so, which one? None, HP PPM, CA Clarity, Plan View, or other?
Votes are still coming in. Okay. Here are the results.
Okay, great. So of the poll, we have 62% of the participants here are using HP's PPM tool. 6% use Clarity, 10% use another tool, and about a quarter use no PPM tool. So we have the majority, about almost 2/3 use HP's PPM tool, which I guess is to be expected, being that this is a vivid presentation. Next slide, please. So we mentioned mentioned, Russ was mentioning that PPM is concerned with the selection and the prioritization and management of projects, and Agile is more concerned with project execution, the development of higher quality software faster. And so let me focus on, how that sort of plays into this discussion. So Agile is concerned with, first of all, increasing quality. The idea on Agile is that, for those of you that, I apologize if you're very familiar with Agile, but let me just review some of the major tenets of why Agile is coming to the fore as the predominant development methodology today. First of all, Agile has a mandate for increased quality. The idea is that at the end of every sprint, you have working code, that it's sprint or iteration, that you have working code. Theoretically, that code could be released into production. Now, it may not be valuable enough to do so, but it is working and it is tested. It is ready for prime time, the code that you've written. That is a mandate for increasing the quality. You don't wait until the end of the project to build quality in. You build quality in at every juncture, all throughout the development process. The interesting thing about Agile is that because it's iterative in nature, and the iterations are typically 2 to 4 week iterations, you're able to adapt. You get rapid feedback between the developers and the business stakeholders, and that ensures you're able to do course corrections as you go forward. You don't know what you don't know at the beginning of the project. You often will see that maybe one story or feature you're trying to build in is going to take a lot longer than you thought. Well, you got to course correct from that. You may find business conditions change during the development process. Point is that at the end of each iteration, you're able to assess what the work that's been done. Again, it's working code, and make any course corrections that might be required to maintain the alignment. Agile is much more predictable because, again, this iterative nature allows you to more accurately estimate the delivery and completion of your project. Agile is also very empirical in nature. There's these measures. There's measures like velocity. How fast is your team working? How many? We call them story points, but how many features are they delivering? Each, their pace of delivering features. How fast are they able to deliver features? One last point I would make about Agile is that the top three are clearly benefits that the business can see right in their face. It's higher quality. It's better feedback and more adaptable. It's more predictable. But there is something a bit more subtle that we see all the time in our customer base, in our customer base, is that developer morale is improved. Developers genuinely have a heightened sense of ownership in the projects that they're working on in an Agile context. They have a much heightened sense of where they fit in the world. They're able to see the results of their work in business situations. The results improve developer morale. So what we'd like to do, I'd like to run a second poll here to get a sense for what Agile project management tools, if any, you're using out there. Do you use an Agile project management tool? And if so, which one? None. Maybe you're using CollabNet, Scrum Works Pro, our own tool, which we're very proud of. And if you don't know it, you should check it out. Rally, version 1, or others. So again, let's give you about 30 seconds to reply on that one. So we need some elevator music, I think, Susan.
I don't sing. Votes are coming in. We're almost there. They're slowing down a bit. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results.
Okay. Almost 2/3 use no Agile project management tool. Rally is the most widely used, 17%. Other, 14%. Version 1 is 8%. Nobody's using Scrum Works Pro. Hopefully, we can make a change there. Hopefully, you'll come and take a look at Scrum Works Pro. Well, good. All right. Next slide. So one of the things that you know you'll see is that we believe, and as we look at our customer base, we can see a divide between this high-level portfolio planning and the execution phases. Because again, as we said, the portfolio planning is concerned with the selection and the prioritization and management of projects, the big picture view. And Agile is down at the execution layer. And the fact is that you can think of it as a wall between the two. There's very little interaction between the portfolio management aspect and the Agile project execution. And that leads to issues in organizations, in large organizations. There's no single version of the truth out there for executives. You'll get a different story from the project leads and from the Scrum teams, as you will, from the project management office. There's no single visibility, no single oracle of truth for executives. There's a responsiveness issue. IT is from the senior executive viewpoint. IT is not seen as being particularly responsive to the needs of business. Who knows what those guys are doing? We threw out a bunch of requirements to them 6 months ago, and they say they're working on it. We don't know. We can't see where things. You know, there's a perception that there's a lack of responsibility. There's also perception that what we ask for is not being done. That you can't point to specific features and functions that you're building into the applications. You can't tie those back to the requests that gave rise to those requirements. So in other words, there's no traceability, the ability to tie work done during the execution to the requirements and the priorities. That simply doesn't exist. And governance, it's real tough to monitor how the work on the project team is mapping to that work that we've approved and funded. So the lack of integration is, we believe, causing problems in organizations out there. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, we can address this. Results Positive and CollabNet have worked together to address this issue. We can address this by building tighter integrations between an Agile project management solution and PPM. The integration will address that visibility issue. It'll tying the execution phase with the planning phase. It delivers the visibility to management that they need. It gives them more responsive. It makes IT seem more responsive. It gives better feedback loops. It provides a traceability between the originating requirement and the execution phase, so that you can tie the loops together and ensure that the work approved is the work that's done. Again, down to governance, better oversight, and enhanced governance. So Agile plus PPM is going to result in executing well on the highest value projects out there. Next slide. So how would it work? We'll go into some detail about how combining HP's PPM and Agile project management tool, how it works in practice. But in an overview sense, again, you're using the Agile project management solution to define active and proposed projects and to manage those, to take the ones that the proposed projects and determine which are the high priorities and fund those projects. At that point, it drops into the Agile execution phase. You might be using Scrum, you might be using XP, Kanban, whatever variant of Agile you're using. And that feeds back into a portfolio review, which then feeds back into your overview for determining which projects are active, which are proposed, and then refunding those. So by combining PPM and Agile project management, we can provide a loop that goes from the high-level planning phases to the execution and back to high-level planning again. Next. Next slide. Yep. Here we go. So in this model, PPM tools act as a single source of truth by integrating best-of-breed Agile tools like Scrum Works Pro from CollabNet to leading tools like HP's PPM development teams, now with this integration we've built, development teams can now use a specialized Agile project management tools while still enabling a single source of truth for project portfolio reporting. So the integration points include Agile stories, which we call PBIs, or product backlog items, status, story points, and plans can be passed to the PPM system to enable project status metrics to be calculated automatically. So that's the goal, enabling product status metrics to be calculated automatically as a byproduct of the integration. Okay. I'm going to turn this over to Russ and my colleague Caleb, who are going to provide a demonstration of this capability with HP's PPM tool and CollabNet Scrum Works Pro.
Thank you very much. This is Russ again. So I'm going to go through a couple of use cases here where I'm going to actually create a request in the PPM environment, and it looks like I'm having environment issues at this point. Going to have to bear with me just 1 minute. Actually, Caleb, if you can go through the Scrum Works side, I'm having issues here with the connectivity. So I'm going to pass the presentation to Caleb. And we'll go through the Scrum Works, and then we'll come back and talk about the use cases from PPM.
Sounds like a plan. All right, let's just get some control here. Okay, there we go. So we should be able to see my screen at this point. Now, as David was saying, Scrum Works itself is very much focused on just the Agile piece of project management. It's very focused on when we have a project planned and we're trying to actually complete it, when we're trying to plan it. What we have up here right now is actually a view of a sprint or an iteration that's underway. Along the left-hand side, we have our product backlog items. In this case, these are actually user stories. And we have a series of tasks. So in Scrum Works, tasks are always nested underneath backlog items, are always part of a backlog item. And the backlog item is describing the piece of work that we need to do, be it a user story or maybe a use case or a defect or some particular piece of work that we've decided we're going to actually execute on during this sprint. And this interface was built very specifically for team members. And we'll talk a little bit about this when we fold it back into the HP PPM side of things. But creating tasks here is very simple, very quick to do. We can estimate how many hours remain. And very importantly, to the PPM side of the world, we can actually track time spent. So we do have a timesheet function here. So in this case, I can say how many hours I've spent on this task. I can move it into the in progress column. So now this item's been assigned to me, and we know it's actually underway. And for the most part, this is what team members who are actually practicing Agile, practicing Scrum, will work with on a day-by-day basis. This view will be their sprint. Now, what product owners need, what the project managers need is a lot more in depth than this. The reporting matters to a certain extent, and for example here, if I select this burn down, there's a burn down that just started yesterday, so it doesn't have too much information. We've just been adding to it. We can get that. We can get that through Scrum Works. This is generated passively. So anytime we make an update, for example here, if I were to add another task, so we'll just add a task, and we'll give it a 25-hour estimate, a little outside of what tasks are usually designed as, but then we can see that this is reflected immediately upon this report. One of the big benefits of reporting in Scrum Works Pro, and as it relates back to the HP PPM tool and elsewhere is that we serve out all of the reports in Scrum Works as web links. So this link down here is a direct link to this report. And if I throw this into my browser, or if I embed this in another page, I get that report. The key thing about this is that it is dynamically updated. So for example, if I were to take this task and we'll just complete it. So then again, our burn down has changed as it's completed. And I go back here and I hit refresh, it's updated. So anyone viewing this report will see updates made to it in real time. And this is one of the main reasons that most organizations really need a piece of software for their Agile projects, because we want to get visibility into the process, but to do that can be very, very time-consuming when we're trying to generate these reports. If the reports are just a passive byproduct of practicing Agile, moving work into sprints, marking it as done, creating tasks, and estimating them and completing them, then we can get a lot more benefit out of the process. Now, as I mentioned, this view is very much for the team members, for the product owners, and where we'll show a little more about the integration. We actually have the desktop client. This is the desktop client. This is a product I have actually integrated into the HP PPM. And I have here another product that I use for demonstration purposes that I've populated with a lot of sample data. Quick rundown of what we're seeing is that this is a desktop client based off of Java. And it automatically updates anytime you connect to the server, but it is still actually something we serve as a desktop client because it gives us the flexibility we need to allow for product owners to really manage a backlog. What are the big problems with an Agile backlog? For example, the one that we have on the right-hand side here is that when we are creating a backlog of PBIs or product backlog items, this is a list of all of the work that we have to do. And this list can get very, very large. For example, if you look at, say, just the Scrum Works backlog, you'll have about 4,000 items on it. And it's just a variety of work that's been worked on over many, many years. And it's all valuable, but it becomes very difficult to manage as a flat list, as an ordered list. The concept of an ordered list is extremely important to Scrum and Agile, however. So what we've done is we've built a variety of tools around supporting this. And part of why we still have a desktop client is because of things like multi-select, where you can actually select multiple backlog items, drag and drop them to reprioritize them. The drag and drop concept is very important. Making this a very tactile way to actually manage your backlog is very important. On the left-hand side, for example, I have my sprints. And if I needed to schedule a piece of work into a sprint, I just drag and drop it into that sprint. And then it's actually ready for the team to add tasks to. These are the tasks that I've added. I can copy and paste tasks to very rapidly populate this sprint out. I can even print to cards, which is very commonly used for teams that are that like to have a physical board with their sprints on it. And all of this is feeding into a variety of reports. These tools around managing the backlog are really for the product owners, but for the rest of the organization and for the product owners to get additional visibility into the project. There are many different reports in Scrum Works. I'm going to show you one quick report, and before I do that, how are we looking, Russ, on the connectivity?
I'm good.
You're good? Okay, so let me show this report real quick, and we'll get back to Russ. The reason I want to show this particular report is because it sort of encompasses or sort of crystallizes reporting in Scrum Works as a passive byproduct of just practicing Agile. The release burn-up report takes three things into account. The blue line is actually work that we've completed, so work that's been moved into a sprint and marked as done will tick up on this blue line, giving us a velocity trend or how fast we complete work on average. The red line will change anytime we add, remove, or reestimate work. So what that's doing is it's actually plotting how much, not only how much work we have, but how fast we change the scope of the project, and that's where the red line comes in. It really isn't enough to say we have this much work and we completed at this rate. We really have to take into account how much work we're adding to the backlog or removing from the backlog to really get a concept of when this particular project is going to be done. And this is a report that just happens if we're practicing Agile. If we're moving work into sprints and marking it as done, if the team is completing it, you get this report. You don't have to do anything additional other than estimate work, and you've got it. And again, this report, like the report I showed you earlier, can be served out as a web link. So it can be accessible by anyone, even outside of the maybe the project management portion of your organization. These reports aren't limited to users of Scrum Works, so they're very commonly used in keeping stakeholders and managers apprised of situations. I'm going to go ahead and end that here real quick, and I'm going to hand this back to Russ. And here. There you go. You should be the presenter now, Russ.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Caleb. Thank you for taking that while I had connectivity issues. So what I wanted to cover today was a couple of specific use cases that Results Positive has built out as integration points between PPM and Scrum Works. And so the first use case I'm going to cover is where you may, say, have an enhancement request in PPM that comes through as a demand into PPM, and you want to ultimately create that as a backlog item within Scrum Works. And so I've set up a very simple request type here called Scrum Works Integration, and I'll show you how you can use this to actually create a backlog item directly in Scrum Works. And so as we come in here, I just simplified the request form to say, you know, what product is it using in Scrum Works? And so this goes out and gets a list of available products from Scrum Works. So I'm going to choose the marketplace. And what release do you want this to go into? And so in this case, I've got product backlog items ready for a sprint. And then the other required field is the backlog name. So I'll just call this backlog created during a webinar on 1/18/2012, so we can see it as a backlog item in Scrum Works. Some of the other things that you can pass as part of the integration are the team and the sprint and the estimate and actually a description. I'll just put the description in the same so we can see that go across. And then if you go ahead and submit this request, I'll go back into the request. This workflow has a single approval, and I'll actually visually show you the workflow. So if we look at the graphical view of the workflow in PPM, it has an approval, and then it executes a step called Create Backlog. So as part of the integration, this Create Backlog execution step could be included in any request type that you may have in PPM at any point in the process. So as long as you have the required fields of the product and the release and the backlog name within PPM and in a request type, then you can subsequently create the backlog directly into Scrum Works. And so I'm going to jump over to Scrum Works right now and show you that this is the marketplace product and the sprint product backlog, the release is product backlog items ready for sprint. And you can see I have 5 backlog items in this particular release at this point in time. So I'm going to jump back to PPM and go ahead and approve this, and then go ahead and create the backlog item. So if I click on Execute Now, that's gone into Scrum Works now, and I'll jump back over here and just refresh my screen, and you'll see that that backlog item has come across as a backlog item within Scrum Works. And so we can click into this backlog item. You can see the description I gave it, and the fact that it's associated with the correct product marketplace and the right release, the backlog items ready for a sprint. So the use case here is really where you may have an enhancement request or some sort of change request coming through PPM, and at some point in the process you want to get that onto a backlog so the Agile teams can start prioritizing and addressing that particular backlog item. So that's the first use case. And then the second use case I wanted to demonstrate is when you're managing a project within PPM. And so I pulled up a project here called Marketplace, and I'm actually going to jump into the work plan. And what I've done is I have a fairly extensive work plan here, but one of the things that I've done is associated this particular sprint to a particular sprint that's happening within Scrum Works. And so the use case here is that you as a project manager in PPM, you know you're in that development phase and you're in the build phase and it's being executed as an agile type development effort. You still want visibility on the amount of effort that's being expended, primarily to roll up the costs of the project within PPM. And so this use case involves our capability to go out against a sprint once you've identified the sprint as a task in your work plan and link that to a sprint within Scrum Works. And while you're linked to, when you link it to the sprint in Scrum Works by choosing the product and the release and the team and the sprint, it then allows you to see the number of actual hours that have been logged within Scrum Works on the tasks for those backlog items that are contained within that sprint. And so as I'm working here, I'm going to ask Caleb to go ahead and add some hours to a task within this sprint on the Marketplace team. And I have this running every minute, so we will see the hours actually update to the actual task within PPM, so the actual hours. And then what you can do is with a blended rate then ultimately capture a representative cost of the development effort for that sprint. And I'll show you here that these two are lookups that go directly to ScrumWorks using web services to actually get the associated product, release, team, and sprint. And so that's the second use case that we've built out from an integration perspective. And I'm waiting for the 1 minute here so I'm going to go ahead and close this work plan and save it, and then I'm going to jump back in, and I think we will see different hours as Caleb added some hours, 16 more hours to a task within a backlog item in ScrumWorks that ultimately populates the actual effort against that sprint within PPM. So those were the two primary use cases that I wanted to cover, and the integrations that Results Positive is built out in collaboration with CollabNet and the ScrumWorks team there to be able to bridge the gap between the project management in PPM and the agile execution that's happening in ScrumWorks Pro. So I'm going to jump back into the slide deck here, and we'll go into a couple of wrap-up slides, and then we will get into a Q&A session. So from a project and portfolio management perspective, as we talked about before, the very high level, understanding and prioritizing the projects and working on the right projects that meet the business objectives, to track the budgets, resources, the forecasts, and you saw the actuals coming from ScrumWorks. So that's really the focus, the project work plans, the project financials, role-based dashboards to see the status of projects and the actuals rolling through. And I'll pass it back to David now for a summary of ScrumWorks Pro, and then we'll get into Q&A.
Thanks, Russ. So yeah, ScrumWorks Pro, as you've seen, is about managing agile projects generally. It is ScrumWorks, but it actually is quite capable of managing any iterative development process. Some of the key features about ScrumWorks that you may have picked up: it does release planning and replanning, sprint planning, tracking and ROI from with earned value metrics, so you can determine the value of the individual stories and backlog items you're working on, product backlog definition, task management, and so forth. Hopefully you've gotten a sense for the ease of use of Scrum Works, and hopefully you've gotten a sense also for the way, but through the two use cases, the way the interaction between Scrum Works and the interaction between Scrum Works and HP's PPM closes the loop and provides added visibility to the executives in the organization. I believe we have a poll coming up now, the last poll. What we wanted to do was get a sense for the maturity of Agile software practices. And in answering this, we'd like just click on whether you consider yourself highly experienced, moderately experienced, just beginning, or not started in Agile software development practices. So I'll give you guys a minute to answer that. Hopefully those are coming in. Okay. All right, good. So of the organizations that have that responded, let's see, 20% have not started, so a quarter of you have not begun doing Agile at all. Right around half are just beginning, about a quarter have moderate experience, and about 5% are highly experienced. And this is fairly, so 75% are just beginning or of moderate experience, which kind of is, I think that's where the majority of organizations are in the world today in Agile deployment. Great. Next slide, please. So we've gone through the two use cases. Russ talked about HP PPM. We talked about CollabNet Scrum Works Pro, and we looked at two use cases that Russ went through, and that demonstrates the connectivity between the two tools. Next slide. All right, let's wrap up now. I want to get to the, we've had a number of questions that have come in. So just to reiterate, just to wrap up, to reiterate, Agile focuses on project execution, while PPM focuses on project intake and the initiation of those projects. Combining these two, combining Agile and PPM, delivers more effective execution on the high-value projects, enhanced visibility and governance across the organization. Next. With HP's project portfolio management and with CollabNet Scrum Works Pro, Results Positive have worked hard to build the integration that provides that bridge between the two, and providing what we think is a marriage made in heaven. Maybe that's a little overkill. Anyway, let's get to some of the questions. We had a number that came in, and again, if you're not familiar with how to do questions, just look on the console, the GoToMeeting console, and we encourage you to submit any questions you'd like to address. Again, before we go into that, just want to remind you that we encourage you to become a member of the Agile Special Interest Group on Vivid, and/or the PPM Special Interest Group on Vivid's webpage. There's a lot of interesting information that goes on there. Also, this session is recorded and will be available to the Vivid community at large. So, without further ado, let me get to the first question out here. What is being used to integrate PPM with Scrum Works? Is it web service? If yes, which one? I believe you answered that, but Russ, can you talk a little bit more about that?
I certainly can. So we are using web services on both sides, both on PPM and Scrum Works Pro to do the integration, and they're using the Open API on Scrum Works Pro and the published web services on PPM. So it is web services built into the special command to both create the backlog item, and then there's actually a service running that brings the time from Scrum Works Pro into PPM and logs that time against the task.
Okay, great. Here's a good question that just came in. From my perspective, PPM seems to be geared towards a waterfall process. It appears there's only visibility into development phase, but with Agile, you could potentially address all phases within a single sprint. Is that just because of the way this implementation was set up, or isn't there a true marriage of Agile within PPM?
So this is Russ. I can take a stab at that question. So the project plan that I showed, and I think this is going to vary by organization and type of execution and ultimately type of delivery that you do within developing software. But in some cases, the reality is that there is a delivery of, say, a solution to the business that requires some level of what's the right word here? Some level of completeness and minimum viable features to be able to release. And with those, I do believe that there's a combination of upfront planning for what that is, what those set of features are, along with the agile development that happens. And then ultimately, there is a back-end process that does release the software to the business or to the customer in some fashion. And so I showed a work plan that looked like a waterfall work plan with an agile development execution phase as an example. The work plan in PPM can be configured to be whatever you want it to be. I just happened to use that we had some upfront work we needed to do. We're developing in an agile way, in an agile methodology, and then we're actually bundling that minimum viable set of code for release. But I think there's flexibility in the way that you describe this, and so it's a fair question. And I do believe that in lots of cases, the demand, whether that be in the sense of this is a simple enhancement request or a change request, or this is a set of backlog items that need to be built to ultimately deliver a product, and there's a set of minimum. I think that there's always some upfront planning from the demand perspective that you may want to tie back to. Doesn't necessarily have to be a pure waterfall methodology, but in the sense of, you know, there's upfront planning, there's execution and delivery of code through the project execution or development phase, and then there's finally some sort of delivery and closeout of that. And if all of those things are done within a purely, I guess, agile dev team where you do all of the upfront planning and there's no external business involvement, then I think you could model it that way within PPM as well.
Oh, cool. Yes, there was a follow-up question that was coming in as you were talking, I think, from the same person. You are proposing, so in other words, you're proposing to combine a phase waterfall planning and design phase, but then execute in an agile framework.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not so much proposing. That's the example that I had set up for purposes of demonstrating. But certainly, I do see that as something, as I've been, you know, in the last 20 years in many IT organizations, something that does in fact happen. Even in purely agile development organizations, there is the business requirements coming in and some upfront planning to say that we know we're going to develop this in an agile way, and at the end of the sprint, what's done needs to work, but we know that that may not be the end game from something minimum viable to ship to our customers or back to the business.
Okay. Question on training is coming in. It's more, I guess, Agile certification stuff. The question is, what is the relationship between the PMP, Agile Scrum certification, and PMI education as a career path? Should I look at both? So I think that this is referring to the PMI Project Management Institute and their project management professional. Being as how I've done some work on this just lately, I'll take a stab at this one. the PMP now has a just looking at the PMI, the Project Management Institute, and their certification. There's an ancillary certification called ACP, Agile Certified Practitioner, which PMPs can sit for, and that is growing. I mean, it's had an explosion in interest out there in the last 2 to 3 months, and in fact, well, partly because they just released it, but also partly because there's a huge pent-up demand in the PMI community for Agile certification of some kind. So you get your ACP, Agile Certified Practitioner certification from the PMI. That said, CollabNet offers prep courses for that if you're interested. We also, as I mentioned early on in the presentation, talking about Scrum certification. Scrum certification is granted by another organization called the Scrum Alliance, and there are different certifications that they offer. One is Certified Scrum Master, another Certified Scrum Product Owner. There's Certified Scrum Developer. There's a couple of others out there. And to sit for the CSM or CSPO exam, Certified Scrum Master or Certified Product Owner exams, you must have completed a class delivered by a certified Scrum trainer. Not a certification, I realize. And I mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate, we do provide a lot of classes out there for that, and we are the #1 provider of Scrum training and Scrum certification classes out there. So visit the CollabNet website if you'd like to get more information on that. Okay, how are we doing on time? We have a few more questions to go through, but I guess we have, right now, I got 9:52. Let's take a few more questions so we can finish at the top of the hour. So a question came in: how feasible is Agile on projects and programs? So Caleb, maybe that's a good one for you to field. How feasible is Agile on projects and programs?
It's perfectly feasible. The big difference between when we're talking about Agile and we're talking about scaling Agile, the big change between what you get in a lot of the training and the reality is simply that things like Scrum are very, very focused on executing at the team level. They're very focused and very refined for that very purpose, and they're very good at it. But when you try to scale Scrum, then things become less refined. Not everyone has the answers. And the big reason for that is that every organization is different. All the challenges are different. So organizations are doing it. Large organizations are doing it. I know, for example, Intel is very Agile. Google, if you look at it, they're not specifically Scrum, but they're a very, very Agile, scaled organization for even very large projects. So it's possible, but it takes buy-in and it takes work from people at different levels in the organization. The big challenge I usually see is that you try to scale Agile beyond a few teams, beyond 5, 6, 7 teams, and then you run into situations where the overall structure of the organization was actually set up to support a waterfall structure. The silos in an organization are set up to support waterfall. And those structures that were set up, the different silos, and in some cases the different departments, have to start to break down or change to actually support Agile on a larger scale. And this is actually one of the places where we see things like DevOps coming into play, because DevOps is actually a play for more of the operations side of an organization to become Agile. And it's really focused on taking people outside of specifically development, and in this case operations, and making them become Agile. So viable, certainly. The future, I think it's more than viable. I think it's actually where everything is going. The trick is just that it's still pretty fresh, it's still pretty new, and there isn't a truly there isn't like one book you go to and this is the manual for doing this. It's different from an organization to organization basis. And the only way that we've seen a lot of success with it is by actually looking at it holistically and taking the whole organization and looking at what needs to change for that organization to actually be successful at it.
Great. This one might be one for Russ. Would you please talk a bit about dashboard/project portfolio status reports for executive management? PPM project plans lend themselves much more to PMI-style reports versus Agile reporting.
Yes, certainly. So I actually didn't show within the demo, and I meant to a way that you might approach this. So from a dashboard perspective, you can, having another challenge here, but from a dashboard perspective, I actually set up a dashboard where you could then integrate the Scrum Works, an example here where I just pulled in a set of sprints and the project health from that work plan to say, if I wanted to actually see the burn down chart, you can see it directly from PPM. And this was just a simple example going back to where Caleb talked about Scrum Works available reporting, where you can, from a PPM dashboard, then drill in and see the actual burn down chart as an example of an actual sprint. And so I do think there's a place where you start looking at the potential linkage between, how is the project executing from an overall health, and then when you get specifically into the sprints and the dev phases, the ability to tie the two together and understand how a particular sprint is doing from that PPM portal. So that the capability does exist, and I think that ultimately a dashboard designed to show the overall project status and the individual sprint burn down charts is very achievable with this integration.
Great. I hope that answers the question. I think we have time for one more, and I have a really good one here out of the ones that have come in to address here, and it kind of leads us into a nice close. Who owns the IP for the Scrum Works integration technology, and who helps me get it set up?
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll take that. So Results Positive owns the IP for the Scrum Works integration, and you can contact me directly to discuss how we can move forward and get it set up. And I'll actually share this last slide that shows the contact information for myself, Russ King, David, and Caleb. So yes, please just contact me directly if there's interest in the integration between the two.
And of course, if you guys have interest in ScrumWorks itself, or Agile generally, Agile certification, Scrum certification, or the like, or PMI certification, give me or Caleb a call or drop us an email, and we'll happy to get back to you. That's about it from us. I'd like to thank you all, Russ and Caleb, and the organizers from Vivid for helping us set this up and for putting this on. We really are grateful to your grateful for your organization, and look forward to supporting you in future events. Feel free to contact any of us and/or Vivid with questions or comments, or even ideas for future sessions you'd like to see going forward.